Welcome to the second of our webinars on the CAF Resilience Programme. We're delighted to have my guests here today. So we're running from 12 o'clock today, closing by 12:45. We'll be having a poll at the start and some questions at the end. So if you haven't sent us through your questions yet, don't worry, there's plenty of time. Feel free to send them through to us at any point during the session and we can answer those at the end. So welcome to my guests here today. I'd like to introduce you to Steph Taylor, who is Senior Advisory Manager for Charities and Grants. Welcome, Steph. Thank you for joining us.
Hello there. Hi, everyone.
Steph joins us at CAF from Catch-22 and Big Lottery, and also Steph is a trustee of Peace Child International, a charity that works in the UK and in Africa. And we also have Beth Clark with us, who is the Programme Manager for CAF Resilience. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you very much.
Beth joins us from London Youth and a background in Barclays, and Beth's also a trustee of a very small charity, she described to me, Community Network, which works nationally. So welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us, and thank you to you for joining us today. I know we have a number of guests internationally, so thank you for joining us at this time. Hopefully the timing worked for you overseas. So run through the agenda. And then we're going to get into the meat of the programme, which is about what is CAF Resilience. It's an innovative pilot programme for CAF and why we've decided to launch this now. And then we're going to talk to Steph about some of the charities that we've already started on the programme. So we've already started working with our first 3 charities. So we're going to hear more about each of those individually and what their particular needs are, and some future plans we have for the programme as well, and what the impact of the programme is having, what we've learnt so far, before moving to questions and answers at the end of the session. So getting into the meat of the discussion, what is CAF Resilience? Now, CAF has been around for a very long time, works with 80,000 charities over the last 90 years, and we're all about improving tax-effective giving and encouraging more people to support the voluntary sector and campaigning on their behalf. And on the basis of what we've learnt over the years, we decided that we were in a good position to pilot a new initiative for us to build on the knowledge that we have and our understanding of the sector in a pilot, which we launched earlier this year. So it's a 3-year pilot initiative. The idea being to enable donations from individuals and other foundations and investors through their charitable trust to make a sustained and meaningful impact on small and medium-sized charities in the UK. And we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about why we've particularly chosen that sector. But what we're doing is we're identifying charities that are absolutely fantastic at what they do, who are delivering really impactful work, either locally or at a national level, but are in desperate need of support to ensure that they're able to continue to deliver those vital services in their local area or wider. And we set up this programme with the idea that the only unifying factor to do with the charities was that they would be small to medium-sized charities, so an income of between 250,000 up to 1.5 million, although as we'll see from some of the examples coming forward that income can fluctuate quite widely, and that all of them are working in the area of early action or prevention. So organisations that were seeing problems in their local areas and aiming to tackle them in a preventative way rather than in a sticking plaster way, acute way. So we launched the programme earlier this year and put the call for applications out for a very short period of time, just a couple of weeks, and received an amazing 321 charities who applied to the programme, who were really demonstrating to us that there was an incredible need for a programme like this, particularly given there were only a maximum of 10 places in the pilot. And what we're going to do with those 10 charitable organisations that we work with is to put together a package of support that will help them to become resilient. We can have a conversation about what that means to different organisations, because I think that means different things to different people. And each of them are going to receive a combination of £15,000 worth of funding, training and advice, and £50,000 in grant funding that year. And we thought it was important that it was a combination of funding plus, so that they were given money to enable them to free up their time and have some resources to engage with the programme, and also giving them the support alongside that money to make sure that we could help steer them in the right direction. And why have we chosen to do this now? Well, I think largely as we sort of entered 2016 and going into 2017, we realised that after 9-10 years of austerity, the impact of austerity and cuts in government spending have really started to have quite a significant impact on the voluntary sector, and in particular small to medium-sized charities. So these are organisations who are really seeing the impact of austerity in terms of increased demand for their services from local populations, from people and services, but at the same time are being hit by cuts in government spending, changes in the funding environment, whereas before they were able to tender for quite large contracts. Those contracts are now going to one or two huge organisations, and so they've been quite significantly affected, and that's particularly true of one of the organisations who's one of the first starters in the programme that Skeff's going to talk to us a little bit more about. So that squeezed middle meant that this particularly high impactful group of organisations are really struggling. And actually we wanted to do something that particularly affected them and could help them to become resilient, not just in the short term, but in the long term. So this pilot is incredibly important, we think, for marshalling all the resources of CAF and all of the different knowledge and expertise that we have and bringing it to bear on this particular group of organisations that have such an incredible impact socially. They make up about 40,000 charities in England and Wales, so that's about a third to a quarter of the entire voluntary sector, and they're a crucial part of the fabric of society. So it's an exciting opportunity for the people that have come on board with us already, and hopefully some more people joining us in the future as the pilot develops. But enough about me and enough about talking. So let's come to Steph, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about the first 3 charities that we're working with on the programme, what they do and how we're helping them. Steph, over to you.
Thanks, Joanna. So the first 3 charities that we've chosen are geographically dispersed, it's fair to say, across Cardiff, Dundee and Cornwall. And we've chosen them to be as representative as possible, really, of the kind of models that these sorts of organisations operate with and the context that they work in. So as Joanna was talking about the context of decreased government funding and increased service demand, we know that lots of organisations, over 80% of chief execs that we talked to in recent surveys of this size of charity, are up for considering merging. And we wanted to look at organisations that had different models to get as much learning as possible, really, for how we might support those organisations to develop themselves into the future and have sustainable business models to move forward. So the first one that you can see here is ACE, which stands for Action in Cairo and Ely. They are based in Cardiff and they run community-led projects. They support about 7,000 people a year through 30 different types of projects, very much about regeneration, extremely community embedded and community led. So the way that they support people is through them developing projects based around their skills, their experiences and what they want to do to progress and develop their community. They've been operating under a Welsh Government grant which makes up the majority of their income, and as you can imagine, across 30 different projects they do all sorts of different things, and they have some fantastic impact, particularly on people's employment outcomes, on their resilience as individuals, on their confidence, a whole range of things which actually, when you try to focus down to say how might this be funded and how might this operate as a model, it's quite difficult. So one of the first things we're going to do with them is apply a methodology called a theory of change, which is a common approach in the charity sector to help an organisation understand what impact it really has and crucially how it has that impact. So what are the things that they do as a charity that help individuals thrive and get the outcomes that they get for them? And what we hope to do through that, and what the charity is certainly clear on, is that they need to focus down on the things that they're good at and then develop a funding strategy that really sees those activities being funded, and a strong sense of what a kind of business model might look like outside of grant funding for them in the future.
And I think it's fair to say that ACE is one of the organisations that's really suffering from a change in the funding environment. Is that right?
Absolutely. Suffering in terms of not being able to plan, I think, in the first instance, not knowing exactly when that grant might be reduced and by how much, but knowing that it will be. And also not having the time and space to think, should we be doing all these things? So sometimes grant funding particularly if it's the bulk of your income as an organisation, can lead you to not focus on what it is that you're good at, but to sort of try to cover all bases. And so one of the other things we're going to be doing with them is a look at the environment within Cardiff and beyond for the sorts of activities that they deliver, and to see what they're best placed to do in collaboration with others as well as by themselves.
Great idea. Excellent. And the next charity of the first three?
Yeah, so the next charity are in Dundee, and this is Hot Chocolate Trust, who are a youth work organisation. They've got a fantastic story. They actually began by a youth worker attached to a church going out into the street, seeing that there were young people who perhaps weren't having a great time at home, needed some space, and offering them hot chocolate and a chat. And that's how the organisation grew. It was as simple as that. And really that ethos is still there, although they've grown hugely into a large organisation. And I think probably the most important thing about them that they feel is central to what they do is that young people are given space to create their own projects and decide what they need in order to progress as individuals. They're in a fantastic position. They have huge impact in the community. Everybody wants to know about them, to know what they do, to know how they do it so well. And Dundee as a place is in the middle of a huge amount of regeneration. So there's lots of opportunity for them as an organisation. But what they don't have is anything except project funding. So that means they don't have the space without CAF Resilience, which they now will have, which is fantastic, to really take a step back and think, how do we take advantage of these opportunities? How do we grow in a planned and strategic way that allows us to keep having an impact in our community? And how do we make sure we've got the right functions in place in the back office and in how our staff are working? So you can imagine as an organisation grows, particularly if it's having an impact in the community, some of that can happen organically. And if your funding is attached to projects and delivering outcomes for young people, really, really important. But what you then might not be able to do is invest in good staff training, or to think about how do we make sure people are using the IT systems and collecting data properly, and all of the things that you need in order to get funding and grow. So it's making sure that they've got a really good plan in place for all that to happen systematically.
That's great. And the organisations themselves came up with the solutions that they felt they need, is that right?
They did, yes. So we sat down and worked with them through what their understanding of their organisation, its key strengths, where they felt they needed support, and what resilience would look like for them. So where you can see on these slides the aims for the first year, they are developed with the charities. Those charities have got a plan that they've put together around how they're going to meet those aims and how they're going to use the CAF funding and expertise to make sure that happens.
That's fantastic. Good to know that it's been led by the organisations themselves. I think that's really important.
It's really important to making it happen. And what we want to make sure is that these organisations are not then reliant on the CAF Resilience funding in the way that perhaps they've been reliant on other grant funding in the past. They've got something that they can sustain and a new business model to do it.
Excellent, excellent. And the final of the first three, talk us through that one.
Yeah, so Wild Young Parents, they work across Cornwall, and they work with young parents and young parents to be, so up to 23 years, with a focus really on creating happy and safe young families. A lot of that can be about creating positive environments for people's mental health and well-being. A lot of it is about parenting skills, and huge amounts through peer support, connecting people together. Lots of young parents, particularly in Cornwall, can feel very isolated and not know other young parents. So a lot of it happens through projects that bring people together. As an organisation, they are actually very well funded through different trusts and foundations who want to support their work. Similar story to the previous organisation in that they get a lot of funding for projects. So they run very specific projects, but that's very short term and it doesn't allow them to plan as an organisation. And one of the things that they identified with us straight away was that they have a chief executive effectively who, she doesn't call herself that, but she is to all intents and purposes the chief executive. And she holds a lot of the strings. She knows everything that's happening. She does all of the strategic work and thinking, and doesn't have time to engage other people in that, or to make sure that there's a succession plan for when and if she leaves, which, you know, eventually she sees being part of her life, that she will move on. And that's quite a common thing within the small charity sector, that you have people who are very, very passionate about what they do and having a fantastic impact, but often reliant on that one person's vision. So she and her team are really clear that they need to devolve some of what they're doing. They need to have a clear strategic plan, because they've been really successful taking on grants, but they haven't necessarily thought, what does this mean for the longer term of our organisation? And they want to really make sure that they've got a future that has the right back office systems in there as well. So some common things there for the three organisations.
I think that's what's definitely coming through for me, is despite the sort of geographically disparate, and actually even the context in which they're working with young parents or disaffected youth in Dundee or in Cardiff, with the community as a whole, is that there are some real common themes coming through with these organisations, which I suppose is why it makes sense for them to go through the pilot programme as a cohort.
Yes, and I think an important part of it will be making sure that they have the opportunity to come together as organisations and to learn about what's working for each other in each other's context. So we've also been looking at the strengths of each organisation and where it might be appropriate for them to mentor each other, to get support from places outside of CAF, and that's very much part of the ethos of the programme as well.
That's fantastic. So great to hear about the first either on the programme, but I'm sure there are another 7 lurking in the wings who would love to get involved. Beth, could you tell us a little bit more about potential charities we'd like to be working with as part of the pilot?
Absolutely. So as part of the process of application, we spent half a day with various charities that we were considering working with, sat down with their chief execs and a trustee or the chair. And all of these organisations that we would like to take onto the programme are very different in terms of their delivery model, in terms of the causes. So you can see for yourself, there's one that wants to research better ways to treat children's cancer. We have another one that focus on helping people to make the most of their money so that they stay out of unmanageable debt. So very, very different in terms of cause area, but whilst they have different strengths and weaknesses, each of them have some really great potential. What they deliver, it would be great to see continue for a really long time, but perhaps similarly to the ones that Steph was talking about, they've just not had the time and space to be able to focus on their organisational health. So in order to continue their service delivery, we'd like to work with them in different ways. And some of the things that they've already identified for us through the application process included one organisation who would like to have a governance review. So they'd like that to include a skills audit of their trustees, training for their existing trustees to make sure that they can make the most of the people that they already have. And they'd like our help to recruit some new and hopefully younger trustees so that they've got some new blood coming through and that they can make sure that they're working with all sorts of different people from within their local community. Another of the charities particularly were keen to review their delivery model. Their sources of funding have really changed in the last few years. After many years receiving funding through the same sorts of funders, they're having to look elsewhere and diversify. And that's just meant that they feel they need to look at how they actually deliver their key mission and how they talk about their value. They've been used to speaking to one particular audience. So one of the things that they'd really like our help with is understanding how they can articulate that differently to different funders, to different people who might be interested in supporting their work. And there's another of the charities who really interestingly said that they would like to explore a merger with another local small charity. And what they said to us was, for years we've had conversations and said this might make sense, this might be a really good way to serve the people in the local community better, but neither one of us have the time or the space to figure out, would it work? Is that the right thing to do? What would that involve? What are the legal requirements? All of the things that come alongside that. And so for them to be able to be part of CAF Resilience would give them that opportunity for a couple of years to step back from just the day-to-day delivery of delivering their key mission and be able to think longer term about maybe smarter ways, maybe different ways of delivering that.
That's really fascinating. I think the merger issue is something that increasingly I'm bumping into in conversations with people when we're talking about supporting charities. I worked with a charity once that merged, and everyone had been thinking about it for years and finally did it. And all of the donors said, oh, thank goodness, we wondered when you were going to get round to it. And I think given the funding environment that we're in, which is much more challenging now, I think we're probably likely to see more mergers coming along from organisations, small and large.
Quite possibly, and it's the chance to explore whether or not that actually is the right opportunity for them will be brilliant.
Yes, I think it takes time to think about it properly and do some planning. Thank you. That's really fascinating to hear about other organisations we're hoping to work with as part of the programme. So, Steph, back to you and talking more about the people involved in the programme and supporting it. Why is it that people are coming on board, and why should they get involved in CAF Resilience at this point?
Yeah, so from the feedback we've had, both in terms of existing donors, potential donors, and the rest of the sector, we think there's three main reasons why you might want to support CAF Resilience. The first is about growth, and it's fair to say that that might mean growth in terms of the financial size of the charity, but it's also growth in terms of social impact, and actually that's far more important. So lots of the organisations that we talk to, both through this programme and the wider work that we do at CAF, are keen to ensure that once they can measure their impact effectively and they're having an impact, that they spread that impact. And that's not always through becoming a bigger organisation. It might be through sharing your learning through a model which sees you as a charity, training other charities in the things that you know work well, for example. So we're exploring for each charity what that means. And by supporting CAF Resilience, it's an opportunity to make sure that your funding has the most impact on the sector in that way, by really ensuring that instead of just helping an organisation to grow, perhaps without thinking about it, as it were, because many charities just don't have time and space to do that, that it's about what's the right way to grow the social impact for each organisation. The second bit is about connecting with other private clients and other people who are looking to make the most of the donations that go into the sector. We know that CAF's private clients are extremely thoughtful in the way that they give, and they want to make sure that their money is able to go as far as possible and to learn from the philanthropy that they're undertaking as well. So there's a real opportunity to connect with others on the programme, through forums, through events, through coming together with the charities, and to engage with the learning. And there's lots of ways that we'll be able to send out learning to people who are part of the programme to really understand what it is that makes a charity of this size more resilient. And finally, influence. So there's I don't think we can really underestimate how difficult we've been told by charities it is to get the funding to do this sort of work. You know, it's not easy to approach trusts and foundations, to approach corporates, to raise money from the public for those what are essentially core admin costs of an organisation. Even where trusts and foundations are giving out grants which are about core costs, they tend to focus on core costs to cover someone's salary to run a project. So they're still not about giving the organisation the time and space to think, how do I navigate this really difficult funding landscape that I'm in and come out the other side as an organisation that has more diverse income streams. So the influence from the programme that we want to have is not only to secure funding for organisations to do that, but I think far more importantly to really make the case to other funders that this is something that needs supporting if the charity sector is going to continue to thrive. And we have a advisory board in place that donors can be part of if they want to be involved more in that influencing. And that advisory board is made up of some key experts in the sector that can help us do that. So we have existing donors on the programme, but we also have directors of other funders that are working in this sort of space, Lloyds Bank Foundation, Impetus Private Equity Foundation, for example. We've got the chief executive of the Foundation for Social Improvement, which is an organisation that's an expert in small charities and training them. And then we have the chair of the Early Action Task Force. So he's our kind of ear into government and what government can do about this when we find out the learning and what needs to happen to change things for charities in this space.
That's great. Very important person to know, I imagine, is we'd like to roll this out. I think so. Effectively, it's people who are on board with the organisation and board with the pilot and would like to be involved as people who want to support the small to medium-sized charity sector and recognise the amazing work that's being done.
Yeah,
having a real impact at that level, connecting with other people who are like-minded philanthropists. I know how hard it is for people to talk about philanthropy with friends and family because it's such a personal thing and we're talking about money. So being able to connect with people who are on the same task and path and having a longer term influence above and beyond the life of the pilot programme, which hopefully we will be able to carry forward and have some real recommendations to get sustainability.
Absolutely, and we're really committed to making that happen.
Fantastic, wonderful, thank you. And Beth, as the programme manager for CAF Resilience, I'd really like to talk to you and ask a bit more about on the ground, what kind of impact will the donation have of somebody who supports the programme?
Sure, absolutely. Well, we know that people give in order to make a difference, and their donations will be used directly to help the charities, so either as grant funding or as expert advice, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But it's to help the charities to become self-supporting, rather than providing a lifeline donation that just gets them through the next 6 months or a year, that gives them the opportunity to think about their long-term resilience and sustainability. So the donations will be used as unrestricted funding. Each organisation that we look to work with, each charity, we've had very long conversations with them around how they might want to use this in order to free up their capacity to really engage with the advisory support. And I guess the way that I've been explaining it to a lot of people, the fact that there's up to 15,000 worth of the expert advice alongside 50,000 of grant funding, is if you've ever been on a course where you thought, this is all brilliant, this is going to change how I'm going to work, and then gone back to your day job and get sucked into the emails and never been able to actually implement what you've learned, this is why we're putting the two together. We feel, as well as providing advisory support and consultancy to the charities on the specific issues that they've identified as needing help with, we think it's really important that they get proper time and space to be able to reflect on this and do the legwork around it, and to be able to really embed this as part of their work. So I'm seeing this as a very short-term programme, just 2 years with each charity, to have a really long-term impact, to give them an opportunity to step back from trying to meet the constant demand that goes up, the capacity increases, alongside the stress of getting the money in and being able to keep the lights on and keep things going and be able to continually serve your community. And this is an opportunity for them to really just take a moment to step back, think about things, and hopefully make sure that they're on the right path to have a really long-term impact on their cause. So the donations will help to develop the programme in the long term, and it'll also gather us some really valuable knowledge and inform our learnings. And as Steph's already alluded to, the sector change, we would like to be able to use what we learn from this to be able to help other funders, other donors, help people to understand what it is that makes a more resilient charity, and to help us to learn that so that we can benefit more charities in the longer term as well.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And in terms of this programme, it's been a bit of a leap of faith for CAF, really. I mean, we thought this was something important to do. We felt that as an organisation we were well placed to do it, but we hadn't done a pilot like this before. So in terms of the programme and the way we've designed it, and it being very much about supporting the organisations with funding and time and expertise, what's the feedback been like so far for the people that have applied to the programme and how it's been designed and the way it's set up?
Incredibly strong. I can't remember, but I had several emails from people who hadn't been accepted onto the programme saying, oh, we're really sad we didn't get on, but we think this is brilliant and we wish you all the best, and the charities that get on this are really fortunate, and please do let us know if you decide to run something like this in the future. But generally we've just had so much positivity, which has been really helpful. Quite a few charities spoke to us about, it feels like you read our minds. It felt like you were writing about us, the way you described how you want to support charities and the kind of situation they might be in, of that squeezed middle that we spoke about. They're big enough that they have staff, but they're not so big that they have huge funding streams and are able to kind of weather storms for the longer term. So many organisations coming back to us saying this is exactly the kind of thing that we would really benefit from. That's
really great to hear, actually, that it's kind of hit the mark with what people were looking for.
We were a little bit overwhelmed with applications.
Great, good to hear. Fantastic, thank you. So in terms of that's the programme itself, that's more detail, and it's been great to get an update from the last webinar in terms of the organisations we're working with now and how it works. By all means, send us your questions. This is the time that we have in the webinar for questions and answers. We've had some few through already, which I can talk through, so perhaps I'll do some of those, and if you'd like to send any questions in, we'll hopefully be able to get to them before the end of the session. So Steph and Beth, thank you so much, that was incredibly helpful. One of the things I'd really like to explore is the programme was launched earlier this year, and you mentioned a little bit about the feedback we've had from some charities already. It'd be really interesting to hear what we've already learnt as an organisation having done the programme so far. What kind of things have we learnt about the small and medium-sized charity sector?
Sure. Well, just from the 321 applicants, because the application form, rather than saying which of these things would you like, tick a box, was very open. We said to the charities, can you tell us what your challenges are around resilience? Can you tell us what the kinds of things you'd like support on are? Can you tell us how you would use the funding? We got a wealth of quite rich information from those organisations that we were able to look through and sort of build a little bit of a picture of those organisations, what are their needs and the kind of things that are cropping up time and time again. Increased capacity came up many times, unsurprisingly. That many organisations are finding that they're experiencing higher and higher demand for their services. A lot of people requested funding for staffing. They were finding that really difficult to find, as we spoke about earlier. Receiving the money to run a programme is one thing, but actually the people to man the organisation behind the scenes. Diversifying income. So a lot of organisations spoke to us about the challenges of finding money in the current climate, but being able to ensure that they weren't just receiving, say, grant funding, or they weren't only taking money for the council, that they were actually thinking a little bit more about other opportunities that would give them the most stable base from which to work, and other areas around strategy, not having the time to really think and plan ahead, IT issues. It was pretty varied, but we found that generally the charities that were coming back to us were struggling with that thinking space more than anything else, and kind of organisational effectiveness.
That's incredibly interesting. And were there key themes within that a lot of organisations were saying to you? Was it one or two, would you say?
It was mixed. I think being able to diversify income and knowing where to go, I think, was one of those things that a lot of charities were struggling with. And I guess there are opportunities, but it was working out what was actually going to make the most sense for them, or how they were going to speak to go for funding that was very different to what they had been applying for before. We also noticed that quite a large number of organisations were very interested in tendering for contracts, but this was new to them, and being contract ready, particularly for local authority, where the requirements are pretty high. Doing the application process is very time consuming and requires some skill that maybe they weren't sure that they had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an increasingly important skill, and quite often the smaller organisations are crowded out by some of the big charities that can manage these contracts and apply for these tenders.
Yeah, if you think a charity that's at the bottom end of the scale of what we were looking at, so 250,000 turnover, for quite a few of them, they maybe only have one or two full-time members of staff, maybe a few part-time, but that gives you a sense of how valuable people's time is as a commodity.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's really interesting learnings. And Steph, in terms of that learning, how have we been sharing that? Because I think it's important for us to share what we're learning from the programme for the sector. Have we been doing that as we've been going along?
We have, yeah, and we've seen this as a learning programme effectively. So one of the key ways in which we measure performance around the programme is against a learning framework, and how we've been using that learning framework to influence. So one of the first things I would say is, in terms of the private clients at CAF who've donated to the programme, we are bringing those private clients together to hear about the learning from the programme, to meet the charities. We're actually getting some people together next week to do that. So being able to really get a sense of what the challenges are for those charities firsthand, meet them and meet some of their beneficiaries where that's appropriate as well. We're then sending out reporting on how the organisations are doing against this these aims that they have, and what they're learning about that. There's obviously a lot of learning as well for the wider sector. So we've been making networks with other trusts and foundations, and sharing the information from them, from the charities who applied. So the 321 that Beth mentioned that applied to us, making sure that the learning on what those charities needs is known by other grant makers in the space, so they can make sure that their programmes are structured in a similar way where that's useful to the charities. And then we're also making sure that we network in with sector bodies such as the Small Charity Coalition, so that when we've got a really good structured way of helping a charity diversify its income, all sorts of small charities can learn from and use that framework as well.
So even ones that aren't in the programme themselves will benefit almost immediately.
Absolutely, directly. Yeah.
That's great. Wonderful to hear. Thank you. Some other questions we've had through. Thank you so much for sending them through. Beth, one of the questions we've had through is, how will I know which charities my donation has supported, and what kind of reporting and feedback will I get?
Sure. Well, in terms of reporting, we send monthly emails across. We are looking to do, and we've already started to create videos around the charities, doing a little bit more kind of video diary of the work that we're doing with them. There will be case studies. There will also be opportunities to meet the charities if that's something that people are interested in doing. So next week we're meeting with the first three, and those who've donated already have been invited to come along and meet them and chat to them. Once a year there will be a much more in-depth, detailed report, but the regular updates will also tell you what we're working on with each charity, how we're looking to support them, how that's going, what we're learning, and so the reporting will be pretty frequent, and we're looking for donors to be kept in the loop and to feel part of that journey of as we travel with the charities to help them understand what resilience looks like for them. In terms of which charity money goes to, we're looking for people to support the whole programme, and so therefore we aren't really doing a programme of matching people. There's a couple of reasons for that, but partly we want to make sure that all of the great charities get an opportunity to be a part of this rather than those that maybe are more popular causes.
So in terms of supporting the programme, the learning between the organisations that's shared across the pilot is as important as the individual impact of each organisation.
Absolutely. And I guess we're looking for people who are really keen to get on board with that. So it is maybe a slightly different way of giving rather than direct to one charity. But what's also really exciting about it is that you get to follow the journey of 10 organisations, up to 10 organisations who are looking to increase their resilience through very different ways. And so there's a great deal of sort of knowing different ways of doing philanthropy, different kinds of organisations that I think is quite appealing to some of the people who've already got on board.
Absolutely. And Steph, in terms of the programme itself, how are you going to evaluate the programme as a whole at the end of the pilot?
It's a good question, Joanna, because it's a complex thing to do. So one of the key things that we're going to do in terms of evaluation is make sure that all of the charities on the pilot have very clear indicators set out for what they're trying to achieve, and then to check in on those every quarter. But what we also want to do is, because it's genuinely a pilot and we don't know what it might take to move an organisation, for example in the case of ACE, from having one large government grant to more diverse income streams, we need to be flexible about that along the road. So each quarter checking in and understanding, okay, you thought you'd be this far along securing a corporate donor, for example, you're not. What has happened there? What have we learned from that, and what does that mean for how you might move forward, and then putting that into a framework that we can share with other charities so they don't make the same mistakes, and they're able to take what we've learned to support themselves as an organisation. So on a programme level, we'll be looking at those indicators and tracking those, and then building that into an approach that we can take to funders and to other donors to share around what's worked and what hasn't worked. The other thing that we'll be looking at is making sure that it's useful for the charities and they still feel as positive and brilliant about CAF as they did when they applied. So building in feedback mechanisms for them to be able to say, these are the things that I found most helpful. And I think that's particularly important because a lot of the feedback I've had from both charities and other funders is that there is money available occasionally for, as Beth was saying, sort of that example of one-off training or one-off support around developing something in your organisation. But if you can't then come back to the organisation and actually embed it and have time to build it into what you're doing day to day, it's not as useful as it could be. So we need to make sure that these organisations really are able to embed what they've been learning and to use that to move forward. So if at the end of the programme these organisations look quite different, then we'll have evaluated the programme as a success effectively. But how different they'll look and how they will look different is all part of the pilot.
Great, that's good. It sounds incredibly thorough, actually, which I think is good to hear because particularly if you're doing a pilot programme, it's all about learning what works and also what doesn't, so that we can carry it forward. I think it's great to hear that's being done in a very thorough way. Thank you. We've just got time for one more question we've had from somebody. We have a question from Brooks, which I'm afraid we're not going to get to today, but we will answer in detail afterwards. So thank you, Brooks, for your question there. One of the questions we've had from somebody is, how can they be involved in CAF Resilience, Beth, if they would want to get involved from here on in?
Well, there's the opportunity to give a donation to this programme in order to enable us to start more charities. So we have 7 that we have waiting, that we've already done the due diligence, had a visit with them, spent some time with them, and we think they would be excellent to work with, and we're really excited about that opportunity. But obviously the model of our programme is that we want to use donations in order to do this. So we have the funding for my role, all of those kinds of things. So all of the donations would go directly to them. But I would say if you're interested, you can either contact me directly or talk to your private client manager or come back to us using the webinar email. We'll send out some information at some point afterwards. But yeah, do come and have a conversation with us. And if you've got further questions, we'd be really happy to answer those.
That's great. Thank you so much. I think it sounds like an incredibly exciting programme that's really started very, very well. Really thrilled to hear so much in detail about what's been happening so far. And if you've got any other feedback, please do email us, because we like to make these as useful as possible for people, so to make sure that we are talking to the subjects which you care about and the issues on those that make the most sense. So thank you so much for your time today. Steph, thank you to you, and Beth, thank you to you as well.
Thank you.
And for all of you to listening, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much. Be in touch soon. Bye-bye.